we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist worldwide.
Tonight's show is sponsored by Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. You can listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. Glad to have a sponsor for this show. A show that has been so talked about over the past several weeks. I want to start the show with a short email from Sybil. She said this. She said, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. My mother took my siblings and I to live in a third world country to, quote, serve where the need was greater. We were a family of regular pioneers. Now, we'll get to the labeling of what they called everyone later on in the show, so hang with me. She said, we were baptized young, myself at 12 years of age, if I'm not mistaken. So apart from schooling and chores, we were required to preach for a minimum of 90 hours a month. We were required to have a magazine route, have regular Bible studies with people we preach to, have our own family study for 5 meetings a week, and have participation in meetings, answering questions from book study and watchtower study, plus putting on little plays where we would show how to interact with the public and overcome objections from householders. Looking back, it was child labor in the guise of voluntary servitude. Funny how she talks about overcoming objections, which is sales terminology, right? You're trying to sell something to someone, you find out what their objections are, and you find a way around them or through them to make the sale. That's exactly what the Jehovah's Witnesses do. And it's funny because when we talk about them, it's always in light of, hey, they're knocking on your door. Well, who are these people knocking on our door? What are they about? What is their church about? What are we talking about? Well, let's go back in time to the year 1870. Charles Taze Russell was a minister who had some issues with many of the beliefs that were held at the time as truth by mainstream Christianity, and continue to be, come to think of it. Beliefs about the human soul, beliefs about hell and hellfire, predestination, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Holy Trinity, and a whole lot more. So, Charles, along with some other people, formed an independent Bible study group in Pittsburgh. 6 years later, Charles Russell teamed up with a guy named Nelson Barber to produce the book called 3 Worlds. And that book talked about God's dealings with humanity, doled out in portions, right? And each encounter ending with some kind of a harvest. He also said the second coming of Christ had already taken place. Jesus had come to earth as an invisible spirit in 1874, kicking off the, quote, harvest of the gospel age. Russell also made a prophecy that they were living in a period of 2,520 years called the Gentile times, and that period would end in 1914, and then the world would see the complete and full establishment of God's kingdom here on planet Earth. Now, these two guys, Russell and Barber, started a religious journal in 78, but they had some disagreements over the doctrine, so they ultimately parted ways. In July of 1879, Charles Russell himself began publication of a magazine called Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence. And the publication had a running theme. It declared we were living in the end times and that the reign of Christ was imminent. Like 16 years later, they dropped the word Zion from the name. Before long, 30 congregations of Watchtower supporters were founded across several states, and those numbers increased. Each of those little churches were sort of self-contained, right? They were governed independently, but Charles Russell would visit them, he'd give advice and counsel and sort of shepherd them in that way. In 1884, the Zion's Watchtower Tract Society was founded as a nonprofit organization that handed out Bibles and tracts. I always think of chick tracts whenever we talk about those. For those who don't know what a religious tract is, and I know there are some who may not, they are like tiny little booklets filled with a religious message, often scripture, quite often something about turn or burn, come to think of it, for those of us in the Christian church, and they're handed out. As we approach the Halloween holiday, we used to go to some religious homes, and instead of giving kids candy, they would give you religious tracts. Well, that's what these people were producing. By 1900, Charles Russell's influence had grown. His organization was appointing foreign missionaries, and they had branch offices. And 10 years after that, they had nearly 100 pilgrims or traveling preachers that crossed the lands to spread the message. By the year 1912, Charles Taze Russell was the most distributed author in the entire U.S. He ultimately moved the Watchtower Society headquarters to Brooklyn, New York, in 1909. By the following year, about 50,000 people globally were associated with the movement. Russell died in 1916 on Halloween, come to think of it, on October the 31st. But from the movement of Bible students he began, and the foundation he laid there, came the religion we know today as the Jehovah's Witnesses. Joseph Franklin Rutherford took over, and he made some significant changes to the organization and to its doctrine, and called them the Jehovah's Witnesses. Adopted in 1931, the name is based on Isaiah 43, verses 10 through 12. It says this, "You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, so that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me no God was formed, nor will there be one after me. I, even I, am the Lord, and apart from me there is no Savior. I've revealed and saved and proclaimed, I, and not some foreign god among you. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, that I am God." Now, over the decades, the Jehovah's Witnesses have been banned in many countries, as I understand it, including Canada, often in cases that they refuse military service. They're not going to go serve their country, and they say, fine, you're illegal. And they've been in court. They've had all these sort of religious freedom court cases that have gone on over the decades. Today, 7 million members of the Jehovah's Witnesses, 7 million, with about 700,000 actual witnesses going door to door, spreading the quote-unquote good news and handing out Bible literature and the Watchtower magazine. Well, let's find out more. Joining me is James Zimmerman. He's author of the book Deliverance at Hand, The Redemption of a Devout Jehovah's Witness. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Not only have you crawled out of the Jehovah's Witness church, but you've written a book about the subject. So how long in the church?
Well, when I was born, my parents were already witnesses, so you could say from birth, and I remained a witness until I was in my early 30s. So, yeah, about 30 years.
So talk to me. I mean, was it a cocoon type of lifestyle? Did you have interaction with the outside world, to other opinions, or were you totally insulated?
Yeah, a little, pretty much yes to all that, because witnesses really straddle this halfway between being insulated and halfway between being part of society. They like to refer to themselves as being in the world, but not part of it. So they're definitely not like the Amish, or they're definitely not living in some compound where they have no interaction with the outside world. But they also don't become good friends with their coworkers and their classmates, or that we're told to just marry within the congregation and to just be friends with those in the congregation. So I did go to a public school. I had jobs just like most people have jobs, but those people, I always kind of kept them at arm's length. I didn't go out for drinks afterwards when I was a kid. I didn't go to their birthday parties. They never came over to my house. So that's kind of how they straddle both sides, I guess.
Well, we've done some introductory information about the church, but I'd like to hear it from you, an inside-out perspective. What is it that sets the Jehovah's Witnesses off from, say, Christianity or even Mormonism? Give me some basics. What is it that defines the JW Church?
Well, Jehovah's Witnesses, first of all, would tell you that they are a Christian religion. In fact, they would say they're the only Christian religion. So they would kind of take umbrage with, how are you different from Christians? Because they think they're the only Christians. But to answer your question, I think the biggest difference is that when they believe that when they die, they're not going to go to heaven. They believe that God is going to change the earth into a paradise one day, and that all of the faithful witnesses and people from long ago who are faithful to God, they'll be resurrected and live here in perfect health and never die in a beautiful pollution-free paradise, crime-free paradise. And those who were quote-unquote wicked or who never turned toward the Jehovah's Witness faith, they will just not be resurrected. They're not going to be eternally suffering in a hellfire. They'll just always be non-existent.
Now, are we still talking 144,000? That was always the number tossed around.
Well, yeah, that's how would I explain that? Let's see. They do think that some of them are going to go to heaven. They believe that 144,000 of their membership are going to go to heaven when they die to be rulers, as, I guess, princes and judges over the earth. So if you meet a Jehovah's Witness at your job or on the street and you ask them, when you die, where do you think you're going? Almost all of them are going to say, they just think they're going to become non-existent, and they'll be in God's memory until the paradise, and then they'll be resurrected here on earth. About 0.1% of them do really think they're going to go to heaven because they believe they've received that special calling to be judges of the humanity that's on the planet.
Is it by works? This is why they're out, pounding on doors and evangelizing and whatnot, because they are trying to earn their spots on the upper tier? Or is it predestined that they will go to heaven?
Yeah. The witnesses who believe they're going to heaven, they believe that they've been called by God. They received some message, I guess God talks to them and says it. I tried asking a few of them sometimes and never really got a straight, clear answer on how they knew. But they weren't viewed as like the upper echelon because they maybe thought they were going to heaven, but maybe they weren't the leader in the congregation, and that was fine. In fact, the number of witnesses that think they're going to heaven has already exceeded 144,000. So some of them, even according to their own doctrine, must be wrong about it because there's too many that think they're going to heaven. But, in fact, many of them who think they're going to heaven are women. And in the Jehovah's Witnesses religion, women have no authority to teach or to be elders or leaders in the congregation. So in that way, there might be 3 women in your congregation who all think they're going to heaven, but they're in no way the leaders of the congregation, Well,
they actually do sound like true Christians if they read their New Testament. No preachers, no teachers, no leadership of any kind by females in the church.
That's right. In fact, they're not even given the jobs that you wouldn't even think are leadership jobs. For example, they have question and answer parts at some of their meetings, right? Well, obviously, in a congregation of 100 or 150 people, you have microphones. So when people raise their hands, you bring the microphone to them and they answer, right? Well, only men could do that job. I have no idea why passing around the microphone is considered just the domain of men, but women weren't even allowed that. So, like when I was baptized at the age of 12, I could hardly even see over the heads of the people sitting in the audience, right? I wasn't a very tall kid. And here I am passing these microphones around. Meanwhile, there might be a 50-year-old woman who's been zealous in the religion for all her life, and she's just sitting there because, she's not qualified by virtue of her gender. So,
well, what is her disposition? Is she happy to be a servant of the Lord in this sort of marital construct where she is subservient? Or is she thinking, this sucks? How do I get out of here? What's going on in her head?
I would say that most of them are...
I'm asking you, like you were able to read their minds. Forgive me.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase. I'm saying, have you ever heard rumblings or seen rumblings behind the scenes of women who said, geez, this is completely lopsided and unfair, and they lament that, at least vocally. Was that a more fair way to say it?
Yeah, and very minimally I would see that. For example, my dad's mother, my paternal grandmother, she's very extroverted, very gregarious, so it's almost difficult for her to stay quiet and to be like the subservient wife, right? So she would often balk at the limits. Like she would say, no, it's okay if a woman does this, or it's okay. So she would kind of push the boundaries of what a woman would be allowed to do, But I never really heard any woman really taking issue with the policy of subjection, and I think that's because witnesses are taught that you have to follow exactly what the Watchtower Society interprets the Bible to mean, and if you deviate from that at all, you're by default considered an apostate and you're removed from the congregation. So no woman would ever really say, I believe that the policy of subjection is wrong, and I defy it. I'm going to fight against it, because she would just immediately be ejected from the congregation. So, in fact, witnesses like to say how much they have unity amongst themselves and how much they all agree, and I have to laugh at that, because obviously they do, because as soon as you deviate from one of their 1,000 rules or policies, you're just kicked out. So obviously the people who are in there agree, or they're at least very quiet about their disagreement.
Do the Jehovah's Witnesses require a certain Bible or a certain translation of Bible to be true and sort of in line with God's true word?
If you ask them, they'll tell you that they believe people can come to an accurate knowledge of God by reading any translation or version of the Bible. But beginning in the 1950s, they started making their own translation from the Old Greek and Hebrew manuscripts. So they do have what's called the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. That's what they use almost exclusively, although every once in a while you'll hear them reference other translations if they feel it was said better or more powerfully in another translation. It has a lot of benefits because, for one thing, it's modern English, so it's not thee and thou, it's you and your, things like that. I know one scripture where it says that, I think it says Peter and John were proselytizing in the shambles. Well, that's an old word. Nowadays we would use the word marketplace, so it makes more sense to see the word marketplace. So in some ways it makes more sense. It's like a living version. That's what they mean by New World Translation. It's the language that English speakers use here in America. There is a lot you can find on the internet where people have found issues and errors with the New World Translation. One big problem is that the people who did the editing and the translating, they're not listed, so we have no way of really verifying their credentials. Like, did they take Hebrew for 1 year in high school, or like how good were they at translating? So there is some issues with it, but I've never explored that enough to really speak as an authority on that topic.
I was reading about it yesterday, in fact, and I think what I'd read was the newest edict of Scripture will supersede all others. That's how they're getting around the contradictions, right? If something contradicts something else in the Bible, well, you simply take the newest edict or rule or story or version and you go with that.
They might say that. I don't know. I've never read that. When I was a witness, they had lots of articles they would write about. They even had a series called Does the Bible Contradict Itself, where they would refute contradictions, because as far as I know, they hold by the belief that there are no contradictions in the Bible. And when there's a seeming contradiction, they'll call them seeming contradictions. When you think there's one, you just have to research it a little further, and then presto, it clears up. It's usually some real tortuous, circuitous logic to get around the contradictions.
I have a lot of other speakers coming up in the show, and I want to make sure that I'm giving due time to all these wonderful folks who have sort of carved this niche out for this particular podcast. But I'm curious as to what happened to you that sort of led to your exit from the church. How did you get out?
I would say because I researched their beliefs and their teachings. Witnesses are told to stay away from apostate material, which is pretty much anything written about witnesses that's not from the Watchtower Society. And I did do that. I didn't look at any of that stuff. I would have no part in it. However, I wanted to back up the things that I knew to the extent possible. So, for example, my wife and I tried researching Noah's Ark. Like, we wanted to find out the scientific rationale behind it and figure out what animal species were on the Ark. And then when it comes to certain dates that the Watchtower Society gives, for example, they say that the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in 607 BC. We wanted to find out the historicity of that. But in researching that, we found out that, excuse the pun, stories like Noah's Ark didn't hold water. And that was really a discouraging thing, because we thought, researching it would help to bolster our faith. But instead we just realized that it just kind of crumbled. And the more we researched, the more we found holes in it, until eventually we realized, well, we're just secret apostates, essentially. We don't believe huge chunks of it. It makes more sense to not believe it. We just have to fess up and come clean, essentially.
And once you did, though, James, what happened? Did they shun you? Were you kicked out? What were the consequences?
Yeah, and this is what my book discusses towards the end of it, is that, that's the reason why I didn't want to leave, even though I thought, okay, they're wrong about Noah's Ark, there was no such thing, but I wanted to keep it inside, because everything I'd already known, and especially being in such an insulated group, everyone I'd ever been friends with and loved, they were all witnesses. So I didn't want to lose everything because of that. But eventually, especially around the time after our son was born, it's like, well, we can't raise our child like this. It's one thing for me to lie to myself and just keep going to these meetings and believing this stuff, but it's another thing to lie to my child, who I'm charged with raising properly, So eventually we just had to stop. But yeah, exactly what you said. People immediately shunned us. That's in my book even. Some of the things people said via email and on the telephone, they basically, once they found out we didn't believe the Watchtower Society was the standard bearer for truth, they would have nothing to do with us anymore. And that includes almost all of my family, too. You know, even grandparents, uncles and aunts, cousins, things like that.
How tragic is that? I mean, do you have any contact at all?
My parents, that's why I doubled back when I said them before. My parents actually do have contact with me sometimes. They're divorced and live in different states, and every few months they'll call just to see how I'm doing. But apart from that, no, I haven't heard from my grandparents in 7 years. Haven't talked to a lot of my good friends in 6 or 7 years. And yeah, it's really sad because a lot of these people I'd known my whole life, and especially being in the witness community, I saw them at all the meetings. We went door to door together. They were the people that came over to my house when I had sleepovers as a kid. You know, I went over to their house. We went to restaurants together, and they were in my wedding. I was in their weddings. You know, so that you really formed tight bonds. That's actually one of the good things about the witnesses is you really have a real reciprocal altruism there in their congregations, and I really miss that. You know, but unfortunately, that's not enough when you have to buy everything else hook, line, and sinker. You know.
Well, I can guarantee you this community will never shun you. Unless maybe you collaborate with, Kirk Cameron on something. Maybe we'll have to get serious.
But even then, I would imagine that most people who are not religious would still say hi to me if I passed them on the street.
Yeah,
that's the strict difference. Is that if my former best friend walks by the street here that I live on right now, and I hold up my hand and say hi to him, he would look the other way and not even acknowledge that he just walked by another human being. And I think that's harsh because it's one thing to say, yeah, I'm not gonna come over to your house anymore and have dinner with you. It's another thing to just say, I'm just going to ignore the fact that you're even alive. So that is really harsh. And I don't see how they can reconcile that with being a religion of love.
The book by James Zimmerman, published by Free Thought House, is called Deliverance at Hand. Is the book out already, or is it coming out in a few days, or what?
It's coming out in mid-October, so we're about a month out, but it'll be available at the Free Thought website, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, local bookstores. There's a Facebook page for it, too, that people can like if they would like to get updates about it.
Sounds good. I'll try to include a link to that, by the way, just because we want to support your work, and we're honestly glad to hear, the insider perspective is quite often the most powerful one. When people come out of these religions, they can speak with firsthand knowledge, and it's an enlightening story for the rest of us. James, thanks so much for your time and for your story, and best wishes with the book, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much. Glad to be with you.
I had an email from Cliff. He said this. He said, I am a former Jehovah's Witness myself. I was raised in England. My mother had previously been a witness, left the church, and rejoined when I was about 11 years old. I was baptized at 13. At high school, I was never a very popular kid, and this played a big part not only in my acceptance of the faith, but in how they reached out to me. All my usual adolescent woes would melt away if I recognized that it wasn't merely the actions of other troubled young people, rather the contemptuous world of which I could be freed. I remember keeping it a secret as long as I could, only to find myself, whilst on a ministry, God, it feels odd to use these words again, he says, knocking on the door of a classmate. After that, the cycle of ostracization deepened my commitment and ultimately strengthened my friendships within the church. Not only did I leave my family behind, I acquiesced to their worldview. I gave up on the idea of college and became a window cleaner, an honest trade. This is, for me, the most bitter of regrets. Their rhetoric robbed me of a decade of study and humanitarian growth. I spent 10 years of my life knowing nothing about the world, yet believing I knew everything about the universe. I still feel that shame, but I'm happy at least that at my 34 years of age, I'm back on the path of education and concern, not derision, for my fellow humans. Cliff, I'm glad you made it out. Thanks for a great email. I've got a gentleman who is on the front lines in helping ex-Jehovah's Witnesses sort of out of the church, helping them with support systems and and especially those who've been shunned, and to educate the rest of us about the church. And we're going to speak in just a second. Our sponsor for today's show is Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. Listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. They've set up a special link for our listeners, audiblepodcast.com/Thinking Atheist. You get a free audiobook and a 30-day trial today by going to that link. And there are just a few books that I wanted to highlight quickly. You know, today's Jerry DeWitt's birthday. Happy birthday, Jerry. And his book, Hope After Faith, an ex-pastor's journey from belief to atheism, has been making waves out there. And he just released the audio version of the book, and he narrates it himself. I highly encourage you to check it out and support Jerry's work. Lately had the opportunity to check out Christopher Hitchens' Mortality. It was written right before his death. And even though he does not narrate the book in the audio form, it's done by Simon Preble, it is still a powerful look at the final months of his life and his own perspectives on illness and life and death. And it's powerful stuff, and it's still obviously Hitchens and worth your time. And finally, I have the privilege of interviewing Richard Dawkins coming up on the 28th in an interview that will release in October. We're talking a lot about his new book called An Appetite for Wonder, The Making of a Scientist. It's finally going to talk about himself and tell his own story. You can check all this out and a whole lot more online. Just visit the link right now, audiblepodcast.com/Thinking Atheist. And thanks for supporting the show. John Hoyle is involved with a lot of websites that help to educate the rest of us about what the Jehovah's Witness Church is. He also provides a lot of support to people who have left the church, many of them shunned. Well, he's going to educate our audience this evening, and he joins me now. Glad you're here.
I appreciate being here.
John is the founding member, and he's on the board of the directors for AAWA.co. What does AAWA stand for, John?
Stands for Advocates for Awareness of Watchtower Abuses.
You are an ex-Jehovah's Witness, yes?
I am. Yes, I am.
And what is your experience with the church?
I was sort of raised in it. I came in it when I was 7 years old. Was baptized when I was about 11. Was very, very active as a teenager. I gave my first public talk at a Kingdom Hall, which is what they call Jehovah's Witness churches, when I was barely, not even quite 16. I pioneered, which is full-time preaching for the witnesses for several years. Even when I went to high school, I pioneered during the summer. I was hoping at some point in time that I would be able to volunteer at the Watchtower headquarters, but I never got that far.
So did you think in your heart you'd be part of the new earth, or did you think you were going to achieve heaven? I'm just curious.
No, I never thought I would go to heaven, because that was older people. We had maybe 10 in our Kingdom Hall when I was growing up, and they were all over 60 or 70 at the time. No, I was looking for what they call the earthly hope.
They believe in immortal death. When you die, you are gone. There's no real afterlife. I mean, I'm trying to get my head around it. They don't believe in an afterlife, but they do believe in heaven. Help me out here, John.
Certain people, when they die, at this stage anyway, since 1914, this is Jehovah's Witness doctrine, when they die, if they're part of the anointed, which is 144,000 who are supposed to go to heaven when they die, they are instantly transformed and carted off to heaven. The rest of us, and those who survive the great battle of Armageddon, will be looking forward to an earthly hope, either through resurrection or survival through Armageddon. And they're promising us a paradise of where the lions lay down with the lamb, and there's plenty to eat, no one ever gets old, and there's no crime, there's no wars. It's supposed to be just a perfect place to be.
You are on the front lines against the abuses, what you call abuses in the church, and I'd like you to define what we're talking about.
Primarily, it's the escalation of elders or older men in the congregation and the denigration of everyone else. So children basically have no rights. Women have no rights. People who do not go out and knock on doors full time really are looked down upon. Anyone who's committed a quote-unquote sin, such as smoking or going to college or playing in athletics or growing a beard, they're looked down upon and sometimes punished for those actions.
So there's very much a hierarchy in place. They have the elites, and then there's everybody else.
You're fairly close on that one. They claim that they're just one big happy family, but in reality, they're not. They're actually very, I don't want to say iconoclastic, but they have cliques. You know, there's what we call the elderettes. Those are the wives of the elders. And they're usually, the ones I've known anyway, are pretty much gossips, and they kind of go around with their nose hiked up a little bit higher than everybody else in the Kingdom Hall. But if anyone's had been disfellowshipped or disassociated from the organization and has come back, pretty much always looked down upon as being something less than perfect.
I was listening to a speech by someone who had escaped a very strict and stringent cult, and she was speaking about the culture that encourages people to snitch on each other, right? Everybody's trying to one-up each other. They don't want to be the ones who are called out for sin or rebellion. Is that apparent in the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Very much. Jehovah's Witnesses as a group are very judgmental of both other Jehovah's Witnesses and former Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and family members who are not Jehovah's Witnesses or were. And, of course, one of the things that they really practice, and we'll talk about, is shunning. They do severe shunning. If you mess up, your family, they're done with you.
Well, what are the consequences to the family if they decide that they would prefer to have a relationship with their flesh and blood child? Hey, you know what? Screw that. He's my son. I'm going to maintain a relationship. What are the consequences to that parent?
I can relate to that because that happened in my own life. I was disfellowshipped when I was about 25 years old, and my parents and my sister remained Jehovah's Witnesses. So I know how that works. Now, my father would never turn me away. If I showed up at his door, and I did on a couple of occasions, he would not turn me away, and nor would my mother. But they would immediately say, well, we can't talk about spiritual things. Well, if anyone in the congregation found out that they had let us into their house, then they would. So my father, who had been an elder for a long time, lost his privileges. But now it's even, that was back in the 70s and 80s. Now it's even worse. They don't want you to mix it all with family members who are not Jehovah's Witnesses, or especially those who were and left. As far as they're concerned, those people are dead to them.
Well, is it a culture of fear and paranoia, or is it like blissful oblivion, right? Ignorance is bliss, and they don't know and they don't want to know.
I say it's about 50-50. The blissful oblivion totally exists. And you see that especially at their conventions, where everybody gets together and they're all happy and they're glad to see each other and everything, and pretending like the convention is interesting, which they aren't. And the same thing with meetings. They're all, lovey-dovey at the meetings and stuff. But then on the backhand, man, they're always pointing the finger at somebody. He let his kid go to college, or his kid was in Little League, or he's so rich, but he doesn't give that much to the Kingdom Hall. Just all kinds of stuff. Yeah, they're very judgmental and very hardline on a lot of things.
I'm talking here with John Hoyle of the Advocates for Awareness of Watchtower Abuses, among other sites. You said something that snagged my attention, and I got to come back to it. He sent his kid off to college. This is a problem in the Jehovah's Witness Church?
Absolutely. They totally feel that any education beyond that which is required by law, and most states in the United States require that each child at least go to high school. Some of them don't graduate, but they can get a GED. But as far as higher education, they are afraid that if someone goes to a college or university, one of the things that they get to learn there is how to think and how to qualify facts and science and education and literature and all of those things, politics. All of those things are part of higher education. Where they will back off just a little bit is a community college or a trade college where someone's learning a particular trade. If someone needs to go to college to learn how to type or to work on cars or do something in that nature, they'll usually waive them and let them. But see, they're not going there to get an education. They're going there to learn a trade, and that's really the difference.
Is it true that Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to buy Girl Scout cookies? Because I read that somewhere, John, and I'm fascinated by it.
It is. They're not allowed to join the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or the Cub Scouts or anything like that. They're not supposed to donate to the Salvation Army. And part of it is because Boy Scouts have both a political and religious origination. And the Salvation Army, even though they do a great deal of good for the common community, they're still associated with a religion, to a Protestant religion. And that also applies to the Red Cross, that they will not donate to the Red Cross. Now, the Red Cross is about as secular as you can get. They don't have any churches. They don't pray to God. They're just a community help organization. But see, they have a cross. They have a red cross, and that indicates that somehow or the other they have religious originations.
There are some other charges to the church. I'll just toss these out, and you can dive in if you would like to. Jehovah's Witnesses are forbidden to serve in the military. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. They're supposed to be conscientious objectors and pacifists, and they don't take sides in terms of political arguments or conflicts.
Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate Christmas or really any holiday. Is that true?
They don't celebrate any holidays. That includes cultural holidays or political holidays, national holidays, or any religious holidays of any nature. So even if a person, let's say, maybe comes from the Jewish culture, they're not going to celebrate Sabbath or any of the Jewish holidays either.
What's the story on that? Well, why cordon off Christmas, the supposed birthday of Jesus Christ?
Christmas is really, that's the big bad holiday of the year. That's the one you definitely don't. That one and Easter. And it's because it's based on, even though it's supposedly based on the birth and death of Christ, they don't associate that the same way, because Christmas is actually the Feast of Saturnalia, which was a pagan feast, so therefore you can't have anything to do with it. Plus, they don't celebrate birthdays either, and Christmas is Jesus' birthday.
You can't celebrate your birthday if you're a Jehovah's Witness? How tragic is that? No cake, no music, no friends, no family, nothing?
Pretty difficult for children especially. So the way they work around that is they have what they call gift days. They don't officially call them gift days, but it's kind of a bit of practice where if your birthday, like mine, is August 3rd, if your birthday comes on August 3rd, then maybe that weekend your family will get you a few gifts and take you out for Mexican or something. That's kind of the way they celebrate birthdays, but they don't do it officially, and never on the person's actual birthday.
Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed to stand up for the national anthem, to salute the flag, or even own a flag. Is that true?
That's true also. And I experienced that myself as a child. I actually was elected, believe it or not, president of my fifth grade and sixth grade classrooms as a student president. And the student president was supposed to lead the salute to the flag. And I told my teacher I could not salute the flag, so she gave it to the vice president. Of course, all the kids in the classroom wondered what the heck was going on with that.
Yeah.
But no, that's like worshiping a political symbol and showing favoritism over one national country as opposed to another, and they won't do that.
So they're taking the position that our God is a jealous God, and even an allegiance to your country would interfere with that.
That's absolutely correct.
No alcoholic beverages, no smokes, no tattoos, nothing like that, huh?
Not quite. No tattoos, because that's defacing your body. No smoking, because you're just not supposed to smoke, even though it might bring you some pleasure. And that's been in place since the mid-30s, I believe. The one difference there is that you can do some alcohol. Now, what they're not against alcohol, they're against drunkenness. And what's surprising is that almost all of the elders and their wives that I knew growing up, and this is a broad statement, loved wine and beer. And that was, when you went over to their house, it was always, you want a glass of wine, you want a cold beer. So, but drunkenness was supposed to be a sin. And unfortunately, because they're pretty lax on alcohol, drunkenness has been a problem for them. The second president of the Watchtower, Joseph F. Rutherford, was a known alcoholic and partied, and even had alcohol shipped to him from Canada during the Prohibition.
You know, if I was a Jehovah's Witness and I was stuck in that church, I'd be loaded 24/7.
There were times when I felt that way too, and I was still just a young man when I was still in.
No, but on a serious note, I mean, there has to be some coping going on, right? I'm in an environment that is designed to suffocate me, unless I'm an elder. To suffocate me, to marginalize, to minimize, to restrict, to build a wall around me. There can be a tremendous amount of joy in that. Some people must try to find relief in the bottle. I mean, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And you see a great deal of alcoholism amongst Jehovah's Witnesses, and I have a couple of very close friends who actually went to the Bethel headquarters, and they tell stories about every Monday morning they would go out and they'd have a great big bin with all the bottles that had been used over the weekend, and they would smash them with shovels and broom handles and stuff like that, so that when they would actually hit the street, they wouldn't be so noticeable as what they were. But yeah, that's even in headquarters. And one of the leaders, beside the second president, was their staff attorney, Hayden C. Covington, and he was a total alcoholic for almost the entire time he was associated with the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Talking here with John Hoyle of the AAWA.co. Are you good for time? Because I'd like to keep talking here. I'm just fascinated about your experiences with the church.
As long as you want me.
We need to come back to some pretty serious stuff here. Is there physical, emotional, sexual abuse in the church? Do you want to speak to that?
I do. That's sort of my focus at the moment. And that's one of the focuses of AWA, is the child abuse and the domestic abuse and mistreatment of women. But the child abuse thing, believe it or not, when I was raised, I was not aware of any of it, and yet I knew it went on. I didn't experience it in my own life. And actually, up until the middle of last year, it was not a non-issue for me. And then that's when the Candace Conti case took place. A young woman who's 26 now was abused when she was 9 and 10 years old, and she took the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower Society to court last year and actually won a $28 million judgment against the Watchtower and the Kingdom Hall that she was attending. First time ever. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been other lawsuits, but they've all been settled quietly out of court with payoffs and then gag orders. So this was the first one where the court documents are public and all the evidence is on the table. I was asked to join that as an advisor and also to do some stuff, videography for YouTube videos, and also act as a bit of an advisor. And that's what I've been basically doing for the last 15 months, is pretty much concentrating just on that.
Is it abuse of children by clergy? When I'm coming back, obviously, to the children, because this is a kind of a hot spot with so many of us. Is that cult-like atmosphere setting young children up for abuse by elders, pastors, deacons, whatever you call them in the church?
Absolutely. But the Jehovah's Witnesses are very sensitive to what they call bringing reproach upon Jehovah, or Jehovah's organization. So they don't want the world to get any kind of idea that they're anything other than just a happy bunch of good Christians who knock on doors and pass out Watchtower magazines. That's their view. That's the way they want the world to see them. Unfortunately, the truth is that for years, going back, dozens and dozens, scores of years actually, there has been a severe child abuse problem. In fact, in the 1970s or early 80s, one of the governing body members of the Watchtower Societies, at that time, I think there was 15 governing body members, was actually dismissed from his position and shipped off to some place in Louisiana or something with a salary because he was abusing children and young people right there in the Bethel home. That's the worst case that we know about, but it goes on. Fred McLean right now is somewhere in the United States, and all the police are looking for him. He was an elder, and a long time he went from one kingdom hall to another, and each time they would make him an elder, and each time he would abuse a child, and he would leave. It's just a mess. And Los Angeles area, just recently, San Diego had an elder who fled over to Mexico to escape, and he was abusing children for 8 or 9 years. In the city of Sun Valley, we just had a ministerial servant, which is just under the elder position, who admitted it for 8 or 9 years. He had been abusing children in the Kingdom Hall.
So while we're watching the headlines about the Catholic Church and the priests in the Catholic Church, why am I not hearing about the Jehovah's Witnesses? They're not even on my radar on the issue of child abuse out there.
They're getting there. There's more and more of this, and the Kansas County case, which is currently in the appeal status, once that's determined one way or the other, the floodgates are going to open. Now, AWA, or AAWA, as some people call it, is actually in cooperation with SNAP, which is the Survivors Network of people abused by the priests, Catholic priests. And they specialize on the Catholic Church. But we've joined hands with those people. And they have a lot of media outlets and media connections and a lot of political support. And we're gonna basically piggyback with them. So I think in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see a lot more of it. And the story has actually been on NBC Dateline a couple of times. There's you can find it on YouTube. The TV shows, and it lays it right out there. And that dates back to, I think, 2004, 2005.
I would assume then with the marginalization of females in the Jehovah's Witness Church, there are a lot of women sort of under the boot of the patriarch of the family. That abuse happens to women as well, yes?
Absolutely. The abuse of females comes in basically 2 levels. One level is just the fact that women do not count at the same level as men. So they can't preach from the stage at the Kingdom Hall. They cannot instruct a man, even if a man who is not a Jehovah's Witness, they cannot instruct him. They cannot hold servants' positions. And where it really comes in, and where AAWA is focusing on, is rules like a woman cannot divorce her abusive husband. He can abuse her all he wants. She can complain, but she dare not divorce him, or report him to the police, because that would bring reproach upon Jehovah's organization. And women are supposed to be submissive to their husbands, and they mean it. Women are supposed to be submissive to their husbands. So a lot of women who finally can't take it any longer and get a divorce or leave their husbands end up being disfellowshipped by the congregation and then shunned by the rest of the congregation and their own family, just trying to protect themselves.
You weren't a proper doormat, so now you must be punished, essentially is the message they're sending.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Let's explore another hard topic. We've got a lot of headlines lately about someone they've got a child, the child is sick, the child needs medical attention, the child requires a blood transfusion and is not given the transfusion or adequate medical care and dies. This is a pretty common occurrence. Of course, it's always too common, but it happens a lot. No blood transfusions, and are there other medical restrictions upon the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Jehovah's Witnesses and medicine have a very unusual relationship since the 1920s. One of their magazine writers was a fellow named Clayton Woodward, and he had some really strange ideas. Among them were you're not supposed to have smallpox vaccinations, you're not supposed to take any medicine that was derived from blood parts and stuff like that. And they actually pushed chiropractic over normal physicians. And that happened in my life. My mom and dad did the same thing. They were a chiropractor before they would go to a physician. And So in 1946, they didn't have a ban on blood till about 1946. And it's kind of a convoluted story, but basically the war was over, so there was less of an issue about serving in the military and conscientious objection and all that kind of stuff. And so they kind of fell off of the headlines for a while. And their vice president at the time, Fred Franz, came up with this new doctrine which said that taking a blood transfusion, which had saved thousands of military personnel during World War II, and vaccinations, that they were banned because the Bible said you were not supposed to eat blood. You were supposed to pour it out on the ground. And they equated eating blood and blood transfusions as being one and the same. And that policy has more or less stayed the same way for years and is still in effect. And so there have literally been thousands of women dying in childbirth, people involved in accidents, young children with diseases or injuries that they would have survived if they had blood transfusions. Over the years, they've changed the rules somewhat where now you can take portions of blood contents, but you can't take plasma directly in some other portions of blood. And the bottom line is that most Jehovah's Witnesses now can actually have just about all the blood transfusion they need to survive, but they don't understand the policies enough. So they go to the hospital and say, no blood, so they don't get any of it, even the stuff that the Watchtower has said is allowable.
You must receive a lot of correspondence from people who have crawled out of the Jehovah's Witnesses, most likely shunned by somebody they care about. They're rattled to the core, and they come to you looking for support.
Absolutely. My half a dozen websites, I get probably, I'd say, 5 to 7 a day new contacts of people asking for support, for questions, to meet up with someone in their area that they can talk to. That goes on every day. And my wife is, I'll tell her before I go to bed, I got to go check my emails.
Oh, yeah.
And
good night. I'll see you in a few hours, sure.
Yeah. 2 hours later, I'm finally done with answering my emails. But AAWA actually put together a segment on their website, which is a support forum, and it gets approximately 250 inquiries a day looking for support or answers to their questions, and it represents about half of the daily visitors to AAWA, just looking for help me and to point the direction, answer my questions. So yes, it's a big part of my life right now.
Before we wrap up, you mentioned you do host several sites. I am going to put the links. I'll go and put all of them in the description box of the video for those who are curious, because we're just dipping our toe in the ocean here. I know a lot of folks will want to go deeper, but can you just bullet point the main websites that you are a part of that might help people?
Well, of course, there's aawa.co. That's the first one.
Okay.
And they should definitely check that out. My classic ones are ex-jw.com. That's been around it's going on 8 years now, and it consistently gets close to 700 or 800 hits a day, fresh hits. I really haven't updated it a lot lately because I've just been busy doing other things. But you read that website, you're going to understand why I do what I do. And then the next one I would suggest would be watchtowerwatch.com. It's all one word, no hyphens, just watchtowerwatch.com. And that's a more modern site, and it really has a lot of stories on it, personal stories of people who have been through what we've been talking about today, the problems and the disfellowshipping and blood transfusions and all the little issues. And it also points out the foibles of what the Watchtower does. And what's surprising is how many Jehovah's Witnesses will come to that website and write me and say, I didn't know that. They're shocked that they didn't really understand what their own religion was teaching them. I've also got a website that's been up for a while, insidethewatchtower.com. That's an excellent website as well. I just did an upgrade on it, and there's some broken links in it. So that would be the one that would probably be the last choice at this particular point. But it's another one that speaks more to living life as a Jehovah's Witness going to meetings, what it's like why Jehovah's Witness funerals are a disaster. All kinds of things are on that website.
Oh, wait, you can't throw that one out and walk away, John. Why are Jehovah's Witnesses funerals a disaster? I have to know.
Well, most funerals are memorials to the person who's passed away. And the classic funeral is you go there and you pray and you sing and someone gets up and the family gets up and talks about their experiences with the person, what their accomplishments were, and they basically send the person off to whatever his ultimate reward is with a fond goodbye, and everybody cries and everything. Jehovah's Witness funerals are not about the person who's sitting and laying in a box. They are advertisements. They're intended to recruit non-Jehovah's Witnesses to inquire about studies or becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. It's an advertisement. They literally spend about a maximum of about 5 minutes. It's actually in their outline. Do not spend more than 5 minutes talking about the deceased. So what happens is they just kind of blow by the person and say, he was a faithful Jehovah's Witness. He was born this date, died this date, had 3 children, was married to Sister so-and-so, and he worked in the automobile repair business. And that's it. That's all they will say. And trust me, my mom and dad, I went to both of their funerals, and it's exactly. And I've been angry about that ever since their passing, because they had very long and fruitful lives, and they got absolutely no recognition at their own memorials.
The church has built this platform, religious platform, on the tragedy of others amidst their grief. It makes, I'm not Jehovah's Witness, and I'm pissed off, John. I feel you, man.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a lot of anger at all about it, but I just feel that at my age, I need to go out in not a flame of glory, but my head held high, that I tried to do what I could to get the truth out there.
Is that why you do what you do? I mean, this sort of scratches an itch with you, right? A chance to go out and take all that you know about the Jehovah's Witness Church and do some good with it, huh?
Absolutely. And I have told my friends, and I told my wife, who was never a Jehovah's Witness, that if I can save one person or have one more young teenage Jehovah's Witness get a college education, one more child not die because of a blood transfusion, one more Jehovah's Witness wife not beaten into submission and then forced to live with their abuser, one more child not abused by a repeating pedophile that's protected by his own kingdom hall, the elders in his own kingdom hall. If I can do that, then I will consider my life as being well spent.
I have no doubt you are. John Hoyle, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation, and I will include all those links so our listeners can go and find out more. Thank you again, sir. Much appreciated.
All right. Thank you, Seth.
A few random facts about the Jehovah's Witnesses. Did you know that the Jehovah's Witness hymnals are called songbooks, and all the songs in it have to be composed by Jehovah's Witnesses? They do call themselves the only true Christians. They call Watchtower headquarters the Society. All other religions, pagan, Christian, any world religion, are called Babylon the Great. Is this correct? All Christian pastors and ministers are called the Antichrist. This is from watchthetower.net, by the way. Changes in doctrine which come down periodically are called New Light. Oh, we've got some new light. They have 5 meetings that Jehovah's Witnesses must attend: the public talk, Watchtower study, area book study, theocratic school, and service meeting. If you reject the Jehovah's Witness message, you are called a goat. I guess that's from the sheep and the goats. Door-to-door work is called the service. Every Jehovah's Witness is called a publisher. The door-to-door workers, based on the time and the role that they play, are named something different. There are auxiliary pioneers, regular pioneers, and special pioneers. They have a circuit overseer. They have a district overseer. They have a zone overseer. They have a branch overseer. They've got a hierarchy in place for sure. And the headquarters in New York is called Bethel. Interesting stuff. Let's go to the switchboard, area code 765. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Jill. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks for calling and thanks for waiting. What's going on?
I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness by parents who were raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, and they had parents that were not only raised them as Jehovah's Witnesses, but were part of that 144,000, supposedly. At 18, I married a fellow Jehovah's Witness. His family became witnesses when he was about 10. I wrote into a previous show, and you read my whole email. We just adore you.
Who's we?
So I have.
Wait a minute. Who's we?
I'm sorry. My husband and I.
Well, thank you very much.
I wrote in on the show about how atheism changed me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well,
I'm the one that said that you're part of our family now.
I feel it. I feel the love, Jill.
Yeah.
I want to know how you got out of this generation. I almost called it a generational curse, but I want to know how you got out of this long litany, this long lineage of Jehovah's Witnesses. What happened?
I was mid-30s. My husband's a couple of years older than me, and he was in the middle of a job change and talked to someone that he worked with who had a lot of questions. He wanted us to have a Bible study with him, but we couldn't answer his questions, and he knew facts that we didn't really know. And when my husband went to the elders to ask, can you help me answer these questions, they couldn't either. And of course, the default answer is you just have to rely on Jehovah when they can't answer.
Is it true that the Jehovah's Witnesses think that the end times are going to happen at any second, and they are always thinking the end times are upon us and it's going to be over at any moment? Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. In fact, I recently heard this story. I'm in a lot of ex-JW support groups, but this is something I had heard as well when I was in, that it is like the clock is a second from striking midnight, which is the end times. It's like we are right there. That is how close we are. That's how they get people to continue to hang on, because it's so close. You don't want to be caught with your pants down. At first, we just became what's called inactive. We just kind of stopped going. And we were that way for like 5 years. And my parents went to the same Kingdom Hall that we went to. And they kind of told the elders, oh, they just need time. But then when my younger brother decided he was done with it, and he told my parents that he was going to have a Christmas tree, then my mom started, they're really big on telling on each other, because if you don't tell, then you can be in trouble too. And so I really believe that it was my mom who got the elders hunting not only my brother down, but they got my husband and I, they hunted us down. So after 5 years of being inactive, they showed up at our door accusing us of celebrating Christmas, which is a huge, huge crime. It's apostasy. And a few weeks later, we just told them, look, you haven't been here for 5 years. Why are you here now? Please just leave us alone. But a few weeks later, we got a notice that we had a registered letter in the mail, and we never went and picked it up. And eventually, I think I ran into somebody at the store or something. Well, and they kind of acted odd. And so I had to go to my dad's for something. And I said, did they just fellowship us? And he said, yeah, they did.
Well, why hunt you down after all this time, Jill? I mean, if you guys are sort of checked out.
Exactly. I don't know. I would like to know the answers to that, but without meeting with them, which we absolutely didn't want to do. We knew that that's what the registered letter was summoning us to a committee meeting, and we just didn't want any part of it. We just wanted to be left alone. So I really don't know exactly why, except that the only thing I can figure is that my parents must have told them, or perhaps the fact that my brother was celebrating Christmas and they disfellowshipped him first, and they knew we were in association, they kicked us out. But why they came after us after 5 years, I don't really know.
How tragic is that they don't celebrate the holidays? I mean, Halloween is just around the corner. They don't celebrate Halloween. It's terrible. Of course, perhaps they just don't like annoying people knocking on their door all night long. Jill, you sound like a happy lady. You in a good place in your life?
We are. It's been 8 years since they disfellowshipped us, and at first it was very difficult, and it continues to be difficult. My husband's family has nothing to do with him whatsoever.
Oh.
My father has Alzheimer's, so my mother will call my sister, and my sister will call and say, can you take our dad for a few days? And so I've tried to help out where I can, but for the most part, they really don't want anything to do with us.
It's sort of changed how you define family, hasn't it, Jill?
Yes, very much. But I will tell you this. We have 4 sons. Luckily, none of them, we got out before any of them got baptized. So they still are, technically okay to associate with. But my youngest is still in high school, but the other 3 are all in college, which is something that would never have happened if we hadn't left. So our life is really very, very good. And if anything, I just would really like to eliminate this horrible cult because it does do terrible things to families, in my opinion.
It's enlightening, isn't it? You don't see a lot of, normally they just seem like the happy people who knock on your door, right? And we brush over as, well, inconsequential any of the more dark, or maybe we just don't know about the darker sides of this particular, would you call it a cult?
I absolutely would. Yes, yeah. I think they fill several of the criteria for a cult. And I get that a lot. Oh, well, I know some Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're really nice. They seem like really nice people to me. And they just don't get, and when you try to tell them, I think people think that you're telling a story. I think you're exaggerating. They really have no idea. It's only other ex-witnesses that I have really been able to make a connection. And there are hundreds, probably thousands of stories out there that are so similar to mine. A lot of them worse because, what he was saying about child abuse, sexual abuse did not happen to me, but has happened to several people that I'm very close with by elders, sometimes out in the door-to-door ministry.
Well, let me just say this, Jill. You may have lost some people in the family, but there's a host of infidels out here in this community who have your back, no matter what. So just no matter how sticky it gets with whoever on the family tree, you got a family right here, okay?
Thank you. That has meant a lot to us, believe me.
Awesome. Well,
thank
thanks
you so
for the
much
call.
for everything you do.
All right. Take care of yourself, Jill.
All right. Bye-bye.
I'll see you later. Evangelism is so big in this church. Now, it's big in many churches, but these people are hardcore. It's central to the religious life of a Jehovah's Witness. Witnesses who are employed full-time, they're known as kingdom publishers, have to spend as much time as they possibly can going door to door every month. Pioneer publishers hold only part-time jobs, and they devote about 100 hours each month to witnessing. Special publishers are full-time salaried employees of the Watchtower Society. They're expected to spend about 150 hours a month on evangelism. And every kingdom hall or church has an assigned territory that it's responsible to evangelize. Each publisher has an assigned neighborhood, and they track these statistics carefully. Number of visits, the hours spent preaching Bible studies conducted, tracts distributed. They keep records of this stuff, and they report them to the society headquarters in New York. Had an email in from Alicia. She said this: when I heard the title of your next podcast, I had to share the story of the sign on my door. When we first moved to Baltimore last summer so my husband could attend Johns Hopkins for his MBA, an openly humanist institution, by the way, I had no idea what I was surrounded by. Turns out, in addition to the attractions of the Inner Harbor, I am also within sight of 5 churches, 1 Baptist, 2 Catholic, 1 synagogue, and 1 Christian non-denominational. Don't know where the Jehovah's Witness church is at, but every Thursday they canvass Little Italy, knocking door to door looking for converts. A tough sell on my block, considering 2 are non-religious cohabitators, 2 are openly atheist, and the other's the rabbi at the synagogue. And yet they knock and repeatedly, all caps, repeatedly ring my doorbell. Because 1 ding-dong is not enough to alert me to visitors at my door, apparently. And because Jehovah is an ass, it's always 15 minutes after I put my 2-year-old down for his afternoon reboot. At first, I did what I did in other cities we lived in. During our Army-sponsored tour of the lower 48, I returned the favor. I said, hey, have you heard of the Prophet Muhammad? He instructed us about Allah before flying into heaven on a winged horse. Praise be to Allah. Or the flying spaghetti monster boiled for your sins and wants to touch you with his sauce-covered noodly appendage. Join the Council of Olive Garden. Or, has anyone told you about John Smith? He found golden tablets and translated them with magic rocks with the help of the angel Moroni. It's so crazy it has to be true. Does it make anyone else giggle that the angel's name starts with moron? You know, I never thought of that, Alicia. She continues, well, as it turns out, I ran out of deities to study. I learned quite a bit about religions across time and space over the weeks, but before sinking down to Irish folklore, I put up a simple sign. Sign said, no solicitors. Now, I thought it was obvious. I'm not buying anything, no vacuums, no makeup, no sky daddies. But the next week, they knocked anyway. I asked them if they saw the sign, to which they responded, but we're not selling anything. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want me to believe in your particular brand of Christianity? Yes, we're here to talk about Jehovah and his love for you. Then you are trying to sell me on the latest anthropomorphic deity created by a fearful mammal looking for agent cause and perpetuated by other mammals afraid of their inherent mortality. I'm not interested. Don't come here again. So I put up a new sign, no solicitors, in parentheses, not even religious ones. Next week, I go out to get the mail and discover folded and wedged under the plaque with our street numbers a watchtower pamphlet and a flyer urging me to escape death by following the teachings of a Christ that looks suspiciously like Obi-Wan Kenobi. She puts in parentheses, your clones are very impressive. You must be very proud. So I make another and final sign. It's in large bold letters, including some all caps for dramatic effect. I'm proud to say this appears to have finally done the trick. It says no flyers of any kind. This means you. No solicitors, not even religious ones. This also means you. If you ring the doorbell between 1 and 3 p.m. when the toddler naps, I am not responsible for any hurt feelings. My neighbors have adopted my technique to stop the Jehovah's Witnesses from mashing their doorbells as well, and random strangers will stop on our stoop to read the sign and giggle. Who knew God was so pushy? You'd think with all that insert power here, he'd have a less annoying way of getting my attention. Alicia, what a great letter. Area code 765. Thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Denny.
Thanks so much for waiting on me. What do you have for us tonight?
First of all, I just want to tell you that the podcast actually helped me when I first started getting shunned, just having somebody who sounded sane to listen to.
Are you speaking of me?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thanks. Natalie be delighted that you said that. So, yeah, I appreciate that very much. No, I really am glad you listened. So it was a support mechanism and sort of a reassurance for you as you crawled out. When was that?
We've actually only been out about a year and a half.
Wow.
We were in a little small country hall where, like, I was the one responsible for drawing up the little territory so everybody knew where to annoy people at. There was a issue with a married woman ran off with a child molester, and the elders told us that they didn't feel like the child molestation was that big a deal. And we started going, holy crap, we may be in something crazy.
Wow, really? So that was your wake-up call, right? You saw them equivocating, and your moral compass was like, no, this is wrong. This is absolutely bogus.
Yeah. We even actually wrote the governing body, which is like the 7 men in New York who kind of run everything. We actually wrote them and told them what was going on and told them that elders were covering up for the child molesters and whatnot. They wrote the congregation to have it investigated by the elders we told them were covering it up.
And so your exit from the church began. Tell me that story quickly. What happened?
Well, at that point, we actually moved away from that. We moved to Indianapolis so we could go to we figured there's a problem with this hall. And everybody kept telling us, well, that's none of your business what happened there. It's none of your business. But a child is in danger. Isn't it all of our business? And we ended up, at that point, I started reading the Bible, trying to figure out, I know we read the scripture and it says this. And then finally I started realizing, oh, it does say that. But this scripture over here says this. And then this says this. And we decided, okay, we're just not going to go anymore. We're not going to create a fuss. We're just not going to go. And it ended up with my wife's parents calling her, asking her about not going, and telling her they were going to cut her off just for doubting. And then at that point, it was like, okay, screw it, we're done.
Did they speak?
And ended up.
Do you have contact?
They will contact her every few months to basically just to basically see how our son is doing. They completely shun her sister who doesn't have kids.
Do you think, I don't want to reduce the love they might have for a grandchild, but I'm already seeing the shunning take place. Do you think that they have hopes the grandchild might be influenced and eventually join the church?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it, which is why they're never allowed to have him alone.
Yeah, good idea. Good idea.
But we had just a little happy thought before I go. We were shunned by literally everybody, including our marriage talk was given by a father, and then his two sons were actually in our wedding. And his wife was like, Mom, they were completely shunning us. And about 6 months ago, I get a phone call from the two boys within a month of each other saying, holy crap, this stuff's crazy. It's not real. To the point where one of them is actually going to a Halloween party with us in a few weeks.
Well, are you guys doing okay now? You found community? You found some place to belong? You doing all right?
Yeah, actually, we ended up in contact with witnesses that we knew from when we were a lot younger who have also left, and kind of build up a little support group of people who don't think you're crazy when you are saying, wow, it's kind of weird celebrating Christmas. I don't know how to feel about it.
Sounds like a great support mechanism to me. So
yeah, it's been awesome. Of course, having, I was fortunate the whole time I was in. Most of the time, the guys end up close to the guys, the women end up close to women. I was always just closer to my wife. So at least when I left, I got to leave with my best friend.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. Well, I'm glad you made it, my friend, and I'm thankful for your input on this show about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I wish you both all happiness, okay?
All right, thanks a lot, sir.
All right, take it easy.
Bye.
Area code 613. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
Hi, Seth. It's Kim.
Kim, are you a former Jehovah's Witness or a perhaps current?
Well, I am a former Jehovah's Witness, although I am kind of under the radar. I have not been excommunicated or disfellowshipped from the organization. So
how many years in the church now, Kim? What are we talking about?
Well, from about the age of 6, when my parents first were contacted, until my early 30s.
Kim, how does the church feel about you? Not if they knew you were an apostate, right?
Yes.
How do they approach you as a woman in the church?
Well, the ways they believe women should behave is that they should be in subjection to male authority. They believe that women should be in subjection to their husbands, and they really don't have a voice in so far as making the rules or, setting any, any policy within the organization.
How does that make you feel? We don't really care what you think. Just sit over there and bake cookies and raise the kids kind of deal? Is that what's going on?
Well, kind of, but, about 60% of the witness population is actually female. So they do quite a lot of the bulk of the door-to-door ministry. They rely on those women to carry out their preaching work, even though we aren't technically allowed to speak from, the platform or anything like that. We are allowed to minister in that regard in the door-to-door work and to our children.
That's actually, because it stands in contrast with some of the other messages I've been hearing tonight, which is the women are not allowed to do anything. But did you yourself go door to door?
Absolutely. from about the age of 7 or 8.
And you're doing what? You're handing out copies of the Watchtower and inviting people to church? What are you doing?
Absolutely, that's exactly what you do. You go to the doors with a prepared sermon, and you talk about the current issue of the Watchtower and Awake, and if people accept them, then they kind of go on what they call a magazine route, so that you have like regular visits that you can make to these people.
Okay, well, let's role play for a second, right? You're knocking on my door. I open the door. I say, hi, can I help you? And you say what?
Good morning. My name is Kim, and I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and we're talking to people in your neighborhood about the conditions in the world and what the Bible has to say about the future. Would you have a few minutes to talk about that?
Slam. I mean,
Thank
come on,
you
that
very
has to have
much.
happened so many times.
That happens far more often than you would imagine.
Get off my lawn, you people. I mean, come on. You must have seen
that's
some
happened
pretty
quite a
pissed
lot.
off people out there, Kim.
I was even at age 10, I was threatened by some guy that said he was going to get his gun if I came again.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, I understand the frustration of being at home. You're home, you're in your castle, right?
Yeah.
You want to be protected from, and all of a sudden, some who's knocking on your door selling fairy tales, and I understand. Well, when I was going through that, people knocking on my door, and with me it was the Mormons, I was a Christian, so I was upset that they were coming after me with a false doctrine. Did you ever end up getting into debates or seeing debates happen between the religious homeowner who was part of a different religion?
Not very often. There were a couple of times when we got into discussions with people who were pastors or things like that, and they had a broader knowledge of the Bible, and they could kind of debate with you, but it really didn't last that long, because you have to at some point agree to disagree. That they're not going to accept your message, and they're not going to convert you either. So it kind of becomes a stalemate at some point.
Why are you not a Jehovah's Witness anymore, Kim?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, when I first started with my parents, I remember the first meeting I went to, I was about 6 years old, sitting in someone's basement because the community didn't actually have enough witnesses to support the building of a kingdom hall at that point. And I remember hearing them talk about living forever and Jesus ruling over the earth for 1,000 years over the paradise. And I thought to myself, this is never going to happen at 6 years old. And then with the indoctrination process and being isolated and having your information controlled, you just gradually get sucked into it. And things went along pretty well until my third pregnancy, and I had postpartum depression with that. And they did not like the idea of me seeking psychiatric help or medical help for it. They thought I should be spending more time going door to door instead of getting help for my depression. And they started subtly, I guess you could call it ostracizing, just saying things that were unkind and not very helpful.
Kim, did they see it as a sin problem instead of a physiological problem?
Actually, yeah, they did. They actually sent someone to my house, unbeknownst to me, under the guise of, being a supportive friend, but their actual assignment was to check my house for demonized objects.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. No, I've seen that in the Pentecostal church. You're walking around naming and claiming and casting out any demons. I wasn't familiar that Jehovah's Witnesses would have anything along those lines.
Oh, yeah. They don't even like going to garage sales because you could potentially pick up something that was demonized or, that could cause you to go astray kind of thing.
Well, don't let me trespass on anything that you would rather not speak about, but I will ask you a couple of very personal questions, if I may.
Sure, of course.
Do you have a family, and are they Jehovah's Witness, and do they know?
My parents know that I am not practicing, and one of my siblings who is a witness knows that I'm not practicing, but they do not know the depth of my apostasy, let's put it that way.
What is the depth of your apostasy? Are you an atheist? Are you still working it out? Where are you at in your life?
I've been atheist probably for about 12 years. I just had no use for any organized religion at all. And I couldn't really square the idea of a loving God destroying 99.9% of the Earth's population in a global conflagration at Armageddon like they believed.
You must carry a tremendous weight over a decade of keeping this part of yourself a secret. I mean, I don't mean to be overdramatic, but if it was me, I would feel like I was in jail.
Well, I'm not keeping it secret from my friends. My husband and my children are aware.
Are they Jehovah's Witness?
Not anymore. Around the time I left, my husband decided to leave at the same time.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him.
So our children were actually raised mostly without that framework, and they're doing very well. They're pretty much all grown up by now, and we don't have any church affiliation at all, and we're doing great.
I'm so glad that you've found your own voice out there, and I wish you all the best and all happiness, and thanks again for being a part of tonight's show. It sure means a lot.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
I was reading here, this is apparently out of the Proclaimers of God's Kingdom Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, 2005. Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe that Satan lives in hell or that he has been given responsibility to punish the wicked. She had mentioned demons, right? In her experience, someone had come to cast the demons out or whatnot, which kind of struck me. According to that literature, Satan and his demons are said to have been cast down from heaven to the earth back in 1914, marking the beginning of the last days. Wayne sent me an email. He said this: "My name is Wayne. I was raised Jehovah's Witness, and my life wasn't awful. My parents loved me and were not abusive. They did their best in the circumstances. Still, there are many drawbacks and difficulties of being this religion. My parents converted from Catholicism in the late 60s amid great protest from my grandparents, who actually disowned and shunned them for a while. But my parents were able to get through to them and ended up converting half the family. I was a shy kid, and I had very few friends until my late teens. But my family was pretty close, and I loved visiting my Jehovah's Witness cousins and aunts and grandparents. I was the type of kid who entertained myself by reading encyclopedias. There were some very troubling aspects to the Jehovah's Witness mentality, though, because they viewed themselves as the sole truth, capital T, truth, and that all other religions were of the devil. It led to a very judgmental attitude. I still recall sitting in the station wagon with my family outside of a church for a relative's wedding or funeral because my parents refused to go inside a church building. We waited until the reception or outdoor funeral services to participate. I recall thinking that, well, how can we expect others to respect our religion if we behave like this about theirs? The Watchtower Society was pushing 1975 as the possible date for Armageddon. My dad packed us up out of the California Bay Area and headed for rural Minnesota so that we could preach, quote, where the need was great, unquote, in the last final days. We bought a tiny house in a tiny town called Clements. We built a Kingdom Hall next to our house. My dad was an elder there. The whole town showed up on opening day to see the new Jehovah's Witness church. Dad tried to support us as a locksmith in an area where people didn't lock their doors and would even leave their car trunk key in the lock so they wouldn't lose it. Man, that was another era. My dad talks about those days. We didn't even lock our doors at night, son. Mom accidentally, this is his letter continuing, Mom accidentally made nerve gas in the kitchen trying to clean the floors with bleach and ammonia. It affected their health ever since. Fortunately, my sister and I were outside. We had no ill symptoms. 1975 came and went. We were flat broke. We came crawling back to California to live with Grandma for a while. Paradise did not show up to bail us out. To this day, my father denies that we moved there because of 1975 and says the Watchtower Society never really said that. If I can interject, it must be New Light. Back to the email. I got married right when I turned 21 to another born-in Jehovah's Witnesses. I got a vasectomy right away because we didn't want to have kids in this old system when Armageddon was right around the corner. We were married 12 years. I became a ministerial servant and my wife was a pioneer. We were looked at as an exemplary young couple in the congregation. I enjoyed my privileges as helping to make the meetings work. I was expected to become an elder sometime. I enjoyed the close friends we had in the hall and was fairly happy. Then in 1998, my wife asked me again how we calculated the formula for 1914. I went over the material and explained it, but something clicked in my head. I realized how much trouble many Jehovah's Witnesses had remembering and figuring out the 1914 prophecy, and thought about how difficult it would be explaining it to an outsider. I mean, we knew it was true because we had the truth, but they haven't accepted that. So I set about reading and studying more. I went through all the Watchtower publications going back to the founders' books on the subject. It really struck me that I became aware of just how much the doctrine had changed and evolved over the years. This didn't settle right. But still, we had this explanation that the light gets brighter and brighter. Most Jehovah's Witnesses never read the older publications, but what really got me was when I became aware that one of the pivotal dates in the formula was not historically correct. Jerusalem was not destroyed by the Babylonians in the year 607 BC, but in 587 BC. I spent months verifying this in history books. My religion had made a mistake. It may not seem like much to anyone else, but to us Jehovah's Witnesses, this meant everything. This threw the whole prophetic formula into question. 607 was wrong. This meant 1914 was wrong. This meant that Jesus did not come invisibly in 1919 to appoint the Watchtower Society to be his chosen channel of communication. I was having a massive crisis of faith. My wife told me to go to the elders for help. I explained to them my findings, but they knew almost nothing about the subject. I started becoming under investigation. I started questioning other things. I'd always had certain doubts at times in my life, but I was good at pushing them away. Now I let them flood back on me. I'd long thought that blood transfusion should be a personal conscience matter, and I started telling my wife. She stopped me that she didn't want to hear. It was around then that I first started getting on the internet. Uh-oh, Wayne. Big mistake. He continues. I found an online Jehovah's Witness reform group that was trying to get the Watchtower Society to relax on the blood ban. I read their whole site and found I already agreed with them. I sent an email asking how I could help the cause. I didn't cover my tracks well enough, though. My wife found the email on my computer. She printed it up and handed it to the elders. I was immediately called to meet with them. The next few sessions with the elders was called a judicial hearing. I call it a heresy trial. They started out each meeting by asking if I had any recording devices on me. They interrogated me about what I was reading, who I was talking to, what were my beliefs. The final question was if I believed that the publications of the Watchtower Society was, quote, food at the proper time from the faithful and discreet slave, unquote. I had to say no. In January of 1999, they announced my disfellowshipping. I was an apostate. In one instant, everyone I knew and loved turned their backs on me and refused to ever speak to me again. No one except my father even bothered to come and ask me personally what had happened. My wife quickly left me. It was like my life turned off like a light switch, and I was cast out into the world. For the next few years, I became obsessed with reading, unraveling the web of lies I'd been raised in. I found an ex-Jehovah's Witness support group locally, and those people became my dearest friends, like family. I eventually settled into being an agnostic atheist. I got involved in hobbies, advanced in my work of stair building, made great new friends, and finally started a wonderful new relationship. Losing my old life hurt a lot, but my life goes on, and my life is good. Wayne, thank you so much for the letter. Just by looking at the emails that have been coming in and kind of glancing at the chat room whenever I've been able to over the last, say, 100 minutes, I know that there are some discrepancies. Some people with different experiences are saying, well, this is different in this church, and this was not had. This is not in the doctrine. This is. I know you guys can just hammer it out. And again, I've listed several links on here for you to go further, and I encourage you to do your own searching out there, as we certainly haven't covered anything close to the comprehensive Jehovah's Witness church, religion, cult, whatever you want to call it. But it has been a fascinating and enlightening look at who they are and what they do. Special thanks out to our sponsor for this broadcast, Audible.com. If you want to listen to it, Audible has it over 150,000 titles in virtually every genre. You can get a free audiobook and a 30-day trial today. And you can support this show by checking it out right now. audiblepodcast.com/Thinking Atheist. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you back here next Tuesday with Dr. Andy Thompson and the placebo effect on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.